those who are not familiar with it, have been running since the ECOSOC Youth Forum with wonderful assistance from our friend Khalid. We've had member states present, members of civil society, and a number of youth constituencies who have joined us. And of course, this all has been around the theme of building back together from COVID-19 while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 agenda. We've had 3 goals throughout the series. First has been to appreciate the progress that has been made in increasing youth participation in multilateral spaces. We have been exploring gaps that still exist. And we have also really tried to create a space where we can deliberate together about the future of youth participation in the decade of action. So it seems to be fitting, actually, that the last session of this series also happened on a day when the UN had a consultation around the creation of a UN Youth Office. And I know that many of you today were in that meeting, and I hope that as we speak, that our insights about this consultation will inform our conversation, because we would like to put out a paper from the series that really talks about what are we learning about the increasing youth participation, how can this be of service to the creation of this UN office, and also feed into other conversations that are happening at the UN about issues of governance, issues around the youth peace and security, and other important items that young people are advocating for in those spaces. So your participation is very important to us, and we're really looking forward to hearing your insights. So today's focus, we'll be talking about partnership for the goals. And many of us are engaged in a number of partnerships within multilateral spaces. And although when we look at SDG 17, it talks about how each country is primarily responsible for its own social and economic development. That these national efforts have to be, at the same time, these efforts have to be supported and indeed are reinforced by enabling environments created through multilateral cooperation, whether that cooperation is economic, whether it's through trade, or sound and befitting governance structures. So today, we'll be exploring how we create enabling environments for young people to be able to contribute to multilateral structures that support national implementation of the SDGs. So when I think about what these environments might look like, these enabling environments might look like, I also think about who the actors are in these spaces, or who these protagonists might be. And so I think about three protagonists in this story that we're all writing together: the individuals themselves, communities, and institutions. So it is clear today that all of these are interdependent, and a paradigm that assumes conflict between them would not enable any of them to create thriving societies that alone create enabling environments for the participation of young people. So we really need to fundamentally shift how these 3 protagonists interact with one another. So the barriers to youth participation have been well articulated, and many of you have spoken about them at length. I would recommend for those who are still learning about this area to look at the 2017 MGCY publication called Principles and Barriers for Meaningful Youth Participation, and I can share this later on in the chat. And this really outlines a number of barriers that youth face, and I'll just include a few of them here because these may be familiar to some of us when we think about the nature of these spaces. So individualism and the creation of celebrity youth in the UN space, and how that limits these spaces from really drawing from the full strength of the large youth networks that exist. Lack of political will and lack of understanding on how to meaningfully engage young people in developing, implementing, and reporting on agendas such as climate action, for example. And we still have rigid systems that hold outdated and false notions of the capacities of young populations. And this inevitably leads actors in these systems to really underestimate young people. And this engagement tends to be tokenistic, marginal, unclear, and without adequate resourcing, information support, and guidance. All of you are very, very familiar with this. Yet today, we see before us a large network of young people that's composed of hardworking, dedicated, reliable individuals who are striving to strengthen solidarity between one another, who are building relationships of trust with member states who are ready to work with them, who are striving to foster a community that is both loving and supportive among themselves and their colleagues. And throughout the past week, and also working with many of you, I have experienced and witnessed this working with all of you. And this is something that we can benefit from as actors within the multilateral spaces. So how can we move forward knowing very well the challenges that young people face. So I think collectively, we can focus on building meaningful cooperation between generations. We can contribute to creating lasting strategies that ensure intergenerational cooperation and collaboration, and that to ensure that this becomes more common and more explicitly valued and sought. And this cooperation can be distinguished by the willingness of youth to in turn be inclusive of all groups and collaborators in the spaces that they're active in. So this happens when these enabling environments are fostered, maintained, and protected intentionally by a community of actors. So we're all individuals in different communities, and we all exist in different neighborhoods, I would call them. So these are the various coalitions, working groups, task forces, and committees that make up the international community. And so these meaningful partnerships contribute to sustainable development processes. And these spaces have a number of characteristics that I'll just describe. They are open to all willing participants. They are spaces where young people are treated as equal stakeholders in policy development and implementation processes. They're driven by an iterative process of consultation, action, and reflection that ensures that we create systems that remain relevant, that we're not just recreating and imitating processes that don't work. These are spaces where one's opinions and positions can change as understanding deepens, both as individuals grow and develop as professionals in their fields and as new facts and developments come to light. So these are just a few examples of what an enabling environment might look like. And I'm sure that as we continue our conversation today, we will come up with many more examples and that will feed into this document that we're writing. So lastly, I'll talk about the last protagonist, which is the institutions around us. So the institution of the UN, its agencies, and also the institutions of the member states have much to gain in opening their doors to young people who have built the capacity to articulate the intersectionalities of the issues they are advocating for. By fundamentally changing their relationship with institutions, young people can ensure that the systems of policy, programming, and governance can also benefit from their full contributions, and that we pave a new way for new generations after us to engage with these institutions. So as much as young people have a lot to learn about what this change should look like, member states, the UN, and its agencies also need to consider what are the fundamental changes they need to make internally to ensure that we are advancing and understanding meaningful youth participation. So all of these protagonists have responsibilities. Youth and civil spaces have an opportunity to bridge gaps that exist between multilateral spaces and the grassroots. They can be the connective tissue that not only relays information from the international to the grassroots, but organizes for coordinated action, builds incredible, agile, and effective networks for consultation and policymaking, many of which you're all already doing today. And the various actors in this critical moment of history have an immense responsibility to learn from past experiences. So what is it that we have done in the past? What has worked? What has not worked? Are we acting with full knowledge of this? Avoid repeating harmful behaviors and put in place frameworks that allow for reflection parallel to action, that we are acting in full knowledge of what we have done in the past. So we have a great panel today who will expand on their experiences of creating partnerships in the multilateral space. They will speak to how current spaces can be reconfigured to ensure meaningful engagement of youth. They will also talk about what meaningful engagement can look like. We have a wonderful panelist who unfortunately was not able to join us from Barbados, who is embarking on a really amazing partnership with the Prime Minister's office, and actually today is going to be meeting with the cabinet of that government because their funding is being renewed. So it's unfortunate for us, but really good for them and the young people that they work with. But she has sent a recorded message. And the panelists will also speak about how youth can be increasingly involved in shaping together with older generations decision-making spaces. And lastly, on how can the diversity of perspectives from among various group ages strengthen our ability to advance the SDGs. So with that, I will hand it over to our first speaker, Ms. Hawa Diallo, who is the chief of the Civil Society Unit at the Civil Society and Advocacy section of the UN Department of Global Communications. And we will share Hawa's bio in the chat of why she's speaking. Over to you, Hawa.
Hi, thanks so much, everybody. It's looking good in the room over there in Baha'i. I wish I could be there with you, but I'm loving the virtual space. So sometimes it gets a bit difficult, although I love people to come in. I have to do, better at that. But thank you so much for inviting us. And really, I'm like so excited because, as you said, we just came from the consultation, youth consultation for the new UN office, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And that's the type of interaction and engagement I personally, as a staff member, would like to see more and more of at the UN. So as Lillian said, I'm Hawa Diallo from the Civil Society Unit. I've been fortunate to really work in many spaces at the UN, at the headquarters, in the field, in peacekeeping operations. But the really kind of most gratifying work I've had has been really working with young people, working with women's organizations, really in vulnerable situations in the urban context when I was in UN Habitat, and now in the Civil Society Unit in the Department of Global Communications. People come from all around the world. And, I was looking at my talking points and, I was just so excited by today, and I have so many things going in my head, but I don't want to repeat myself because I've heard some really awesome suggestions straight from the mouth of young people in terms of what does engagement mean? What should the UN office look like? So I'm going to save a bit of that for when we go into the working rooms. And I kept thinking about, really what is this event about today? Because, it says to talk about spaces at the UN, for engagement, and how would you reconfigure that? And then for me, I'm saying, what does spaces mean? Are we talking about formal structures at the UN only? Because I think you need to think about external structures to the UN, internal structures to the UN, structures within your own organizations. To me, talking to my mom is a space. So for me, I think about spaces or engagement in a loosely, like broad kind of person-to-person definition. So that if I pick up the phone and I'm speaking to a young person, I mentor a lot of people, what comes out of my mouth in terms of the UN, what they can do, what are their potentials, their capacities, what I can learn from them means a lot also. That's an important space, I think, that we tend to just forget about. Or at the dinner table, I'm always excited to come from something, or that meeting I had today with many of you. I'm sure I'll be talking about it forever for everybody I meet, either at the dinner table, on a phone conversation, on WhatsApp, or maybe in the next meeting that I go to. And for me, it's important that I stay true to what I heard directly from the horse's mouth, not putting in my own UNEs or my own interpretation, but directly hearing what young people are saying and wanting. Because I believe that some of the spaces that we have within the UN, young people are invisible. That, we always say, we represent the world, but I always ask myself, who really am I targeting? And really, who really am I impacting? Because many of us go to speaking engagements or events and are shocked when people say, oh, I've never heard about the SDGs before. Or, what's the UN? Of course. We don't have the ability to reach everybody. So we need to make sure that our spaces, if they're internal in the UN, whether it's the high-level political forum that's taking place right now, is connected to what's happening on the ground. So if it's internal structures of the UN, we have to see how we, connect to our regional offices, whether it's the Economic Commission of Africa or the one ESQA or ESCAP in Thailand or Lebanon, and how the messaging of the UN is locally adapted. And for me, that means context and it means language. I don't know who knows that. I think a couple of days ago, we finally have International Day of Kiswahili. Habari, everybody. I mean, we should be in UN spaces on the local level, connecting on the languages. I'm waiting for the day when the UN is going to have International Mende Day from Sierra Leone. And the spaces that we have at the UN, they need to be relevant to what's happening to people's lives. Because I can go in and talk about all the big structures, or even if I am on the ground and I'm talking about, let's say, I don't know if they still have the UNDAF structures in the national frameworks of policymaking and on UN issues. But if you are in my mom's village in Pujon and you don't have any food to eat, I don't know how you're going to be talking about our common agenda. So the spaces have to be relevant and meet the immediate needs of people. If I'm hungry, I don't care about human rights. This is the reality. I'm not going to be thinking about the environment. It could be in the back of my head. But how are these spaces, again, meeting those immediate needs of people? Now, in these spaces, we have to listen. Our common agenda says that we're going to listen to young people. But then I had a young person the other day tell me, so when you're finished listening, what are you going to do? And what does listen mean? In these spaces, are we listening, and are we going beyond listening and really going into action? And I'm not talking action planning, but action on the ground. And is that action, again, as I said, relevant to what's happening in the spaces or the environments that we are trying to, to connect to or trying to impact? And I think something I heard a lot about in the consultation we just came from in the youth office is resources. A lot of times we say, do this, do that. As NGOs, as young people, it's your responsibility. You're awesome, you're brilliant. Show me the money. How are we, you as young people, going to get these things done? Yes, we can rely on government, and government needs to show the money too, but international organizations must follow suit. Then again, I always say, in these spaces, regardless of what it is, you as young people must be accountable. It's not up to Howard Diallo, it's not up to Jayatma, it's not up to the Secretary General, and it's not only up to your government. You as a young person, how are you, I guess, maybe looking at your local resources, existing resources in your environment? How are you cooperating? You said something, the cooperation, not just intergenerationally. I find sometimes that young people across NGO groups do not cooperate. Many more are doing that, and this event being put together is a good example. You have a cross-section of young groups and networks that are bringing us together, but don't hog up the information. Don't hog up the resources that you have. How do you find out something, and how do you share with other people so that it's a collective action in terms of how even the United Nations is? Many voices is better, I think, than one. So for me, these are just some of the things that come to my head. And I think where we are right now, you have a lot of people who are part of the UN. I don't know who has never been in a UN meeting here in this session. So, I could rattle off that there are spaces, HLPF, we just came from the Ocean Conference in Portugal. There was a youth forum there. We had, the transport conference that happened. We have the COPs, we have the one coming up in Egypt. All of these have youth spaces that you can engage in. But I always say, why wait for the UN? We are only one lonely person. What are you doing in your neighborhood, in your neck of the woods? Are you doing something in school? Are you doing something on your block? Are you doing something in your family? The UN does a lot, but it should not be your savior. You should collaborate with us, but you should be independently developing awesome, and I know many people do that already, but awesome ideas and projects that you bring to your community, to your neighborhood, to your government, and bring to the UN at the global level. Do not feel as if you have to be as beautiful as the Baha'i office is at this table here alone, or find yourself in conference room 4 or in the General Assembly. Think of what you can impact and what you can trailblaze on your street, on your block, in your neighborhood, in your community. I want to thank you very much. I could go in for days about this because I am passionate and I love, these type of discussions. I will leave more for the working room. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to hear what everybody else has to say. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Hawa. And I know it's really nice that we've been having this series, and I think there's so much more that we can discuss. And hopefully this series is just one of many more that will happen, not just in New York, but also in other spaces and nationally and locally as everybody goes back home from the HLPF and we continues this conversation. So next I will introduce Ms. Tamaisha Ito, who is the project director of Future Barbados. As I mentioned, Tamaisha is sorry she could not join us in person as she's meeting with the cabinet of Barbados, but she has recorded this message to share with us what that government is doing to create enabling spaces for youth.
Good day, everyone. And I sincerely apologize for my lack of attendance in person or life, but sometimes the best laid plans get derailed, but there's always a workaround. I'm excited to be presenting on this from the past to the future as I present on the concept and the program I run called Future Barbados. My name is Tamaisha Eitel, and I was given the task in the summer of 2021 to create a program that activated the talent under the age of 35 in Barbados. Barbados has a long history of investing in education and young people. Free education is provided at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level. But somewhere there was a disconnect. The question remained, we invested in the education, but then what? I have the privilege of leading and forming Future Barbados, an innovation think tank out of the Prime Minister's office in Barbados. Dubbed a moonshot factory, we are a deliberate investment of the government of Barbados in finding and activating talent under the age of 35 to create solutions to some of the biggest problems faced by the nation. We are a practical example of how intergenerational cooperation can and should happen. The project was created by the Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Mottley, when she realized there was a gap between finding solutions to the country's biggest problems and finding the talent to work on the implementation of these solutions. The sustainable development of Barbados needed deliberate investment in talent to work alongside the government to rapidly shift thinking and action on the ground. It meant more than just youth caucuses and youth meetings, but providing young people with resources, trust, and agency to actually do. I can categorically say youth are tired of consultations and they want to move to action. What we do not have in Barbados is the luxury of time. Our first scare for the hurricane season was a few weeks ago. Our challenges are real and urgent. We are running a sprint and a marathon simultaneously. Future Barbados, for the last 9 months, has brought together 25 people from across disciplines, regardless of educational background, to create and discover solutions and develop implementation plans for these concepts. Plans were developed under several thematic areas. We started at 5, and then in the ideation process, many more things showed up. We have Future Safe, which looks at mechanisms around reducing crime, youth in crime, reducing recidivism rates, and strategies towards enhancing citizen security. Future Speak, which explores ways to create a more functionally bilingual Barbados. Future Health, which looks at combating childhood obesity and our wider national battle with non-communicable diseases. Future Blue and Future Green, aimed at activating more opportunities within the blue and green economy and new approaches to climate change. Future Gov looks at creating better digital services for our citizens. And Future Culture/Sports, which are already the basis of our societal relation, looked at enhancing the ecosystem towards a commodity that's locally and globally relevant. All our ideas, regardless of thematic areas, had several approaches and were grounded in 3 main things: data, policy, and technology. We needed to have data-driven solutions, whether we had the data or needed to find the data. We needed to understand the policies that existed or needed to exist to enhance the framework for implementation and rollout and success of initiatives. And we needed technology. Technology is our future. All our solutions needed to be based in technology, as that also led to more data being collected. These topics look no different to many of the 17 SDGs that we have already been working on. We have been challenged to both innovate within the box of our traditional processes and think beyond the box to figure out what needs to be changed to create a runway for sustainable action. Our team not only ideates on what is possible, but also finds great examples of things that have already been done. We have been exploring South-South partnerships, global investments, and finding things that have been happening in other parts of the world that can be successful here in Barbados. But let's not forget the impossible. We have been dreaming of what we think is impossible and how that could change our everyday lives. We are now moving to what is known as the flight phase of our mission, where we're challenged to do in 6 months what will typically take years in traditional implementation processes. None of what we're doing is new or groundbreaking just yet. None of it is hard for anybody to wrap their head around. In our estimation, what is different is a deliberate and active engagement of young people, but not just as tokens, but the thinkers, dreamers, and doers that they are. What is different is a dedication of resources for this investment. We have been able to compensate our talent for their time and effort. What is different is that the government believes in investing not only in the people and the planning, but the action. The ideas are not just sent to the private sector for funding, but we're provided with opportunities to review how the government is already spending our public funds and how we can find new approaches to spend, working with the existing knowledge base that we have. What is different is the trust, the intergenerational trust that we've been given, that failing is an option, but doing is the priority. Let's not forget the younger generation and the people, the stewards of the future generation, are people we already know and trust. There are many of us here online, sitting in the room next to you. They're your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins. Can you believe the average age of founders for billion-dollar businesses is 34? We have created these unnecessary buckets and categories despite having this shared humanity. So to incorporate a diversity of perspectives, it's already there. It is already happening. We need to stop looking at the separation. Whatever you call the younger generations now, the Gen Zs, the millennial, and whatever we'll name the COVID generation, we have seen a clear attitude and energy towards doing things better regardless of our background. Diverse voices have been heard. They just now need to be included. A commitment towards future generations is no different than the commitments already made towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We just need to be doing more. For us at Future Barbados, with the support of the government, what's next and what is now is continued inclusivity. We will be continuing to run these ideation processes in our project catapult. We'll be implementing programs in our flight stage. So we are deliberately including future generations, younger generations, not just in planning, but in action. Thank you.
So we're really happy that Tamaisha was able to, yes, I want to cover her too. It's really wonderful that she was able to record this message and share with us the experiences of Barbados. And hopefully as time goes that we'll have more of these experiences from different countries as they think about how to provide resources for young people and how to create these environments. So I will hand it over next to Juan Pablo Celis, who is a youth program coordinator at the UN Environmental Program. Over to you, Juan.
Thank you very much, Lily, and hello, everybody, friends and colleagues. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today, joining from the beautiful Nairobi, Kenya, where the headquarters offices of the UN Environment Programs are based. And I wish I was there in the Baha'i offices. I miss the good times back in 2019 in the beautiful conference room. And yeah, so I think it's quite a moment to after coming from these consultations on the UN Youth Office, and they really got me thinking and reflecting on how important it is to really understand what meaningful engagement is, and I think I have a few points that I wanted to share with you on how I envision that meaningful youth engagement should be applied. And one of these points is definitely that participation needs to be institutionalized. And by saying that, I not only mean at the UN as an organization, which is, I mean, by developing a youth office, having a youth office, I think it's the best way to institutionalize engagement. But that goes beyond the UN. And when we talk about government participation, we still see how young people are really underrepresented and how the policies that are in place in the national governments limit young people from even participating in the political space. And that's one of the features that we have to really be looking at and finding ways to really change that. And I think that it's not easy, but it's one of the points that is necessary to really institutionalize engagement. I think through the civil society space, young people are really have made their voice heard, have been strong enough to put their ideas out there. But there are other spaces like in the government, like in the private sector, where we still need much more of that engagement. And that's when it takes me to the second point, that meaningful youth engagement, and it needs to be, when we talk about the intergenerational aspect of engagement, we need to build those youthful diplomatic skills to be able to really have a meaningful change at the policy level. But that only happens when we have intergenerational conversations and intergenerational action. And based on my experience, I think that before we build partnerships, I think we need to build friendships. And that happens with other generations. Sometimes it feels like we are, sometimes we feel like we're competing with the other generations, or it feels like we're gonna get our points out there, but it feels that it's something isolated from other generations. And I think that I've seen how meaningful change has happened when we build those friendships before we really move into partnerships. And one of those key aspects of building those friendships is that we need to find ways to put ourselves in the shoes of other generations and building dialogues with those other generations that might be on those leadership positions. And even if those visions that they have differ from ours, that doesn't mean that they cannot help us get where we want to get. And sometimes that's envisioned differently. We kind of want to go our own ways and build our own vision, but I've seen it myself as a young person in the UN system, is that we need to try to put ourselves on the other generation's shoes, but also try to find ways that we could meet halfway and also help them or where they want to get, but also try to bring our ideas across the table without having to hurt other people's vision. And I think that's there are certain points that we definitely have no negotiation, but I think that there's more than less people in the older generation that are happy to help us than are not happy to help us. So I think it's something that we have to really keep in mind, and also think of the UN. I think I echo what Howard mentioned. The UN, it's a common space, and we all come here to bring in our points and ideas. We sit down we make our voices heard. But when we talk about truly meaningful change, is when we leave that living room space, and we go to our own room, which is our home, our countries, our neighborhoods, the people that are around us. How does that really, those conversations that we're having here are really impacting those communities on the ground? And what are we making sure that even in our own space at home or with our own families, that they even understand what meaningful youth engagement or what the SDGs are? And that's something that we really should not forget. And before I wrap up, I think that no other generation understands better innovation and technology, and we could use that really on our advantage to make sure that what our key priorities are, that we need to make sure that we bring in those spaces where innovation and technology is happening, because we understand it better than anyone else. And I think that's something that the UN as an organization could not ignore, that when young people get together online and outside, and when they speak up, it's really hard to ignore. And that's when we see the truly, changes in the institution. And that's why I think that after all these years, when, many of you have been advocating for space, we see the realization of a UN Youth Office, which, many decades ago could have just been a dream. And I just want to end up with with that last part, and also just mentioning that in the UN Environment Program, we have a program called the Young Champions of the Earth, which is a program that is truly helping young people on the ground to solve environmental issues in their communities. And the way that I've seen this program evolve is when we are actually helping with resources, young people with ideas, and we're actually mentoring young people with those, those projects that they have on the ground. So it's really a message to do not forget that even if we're sitting on these places with privilege, that there's still issues on the ground in our communities that we cannot forget, and that we're really, we really have the privilege to bring those issues up to the places that decisions are made. So thank you very much for the space, and happy to be here. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Juan. And you shared so many things, but I think one thing that resonated with everybody, and I saw it in the chat as well, is this idea of friendships. And that's really what allows us to work together well, because as we know, sometimes in multilateral spaces, these challenges can be draining. And it's when we draw on these friendships that allows us to keep us going. So I would now introduce Saji, who is the director of the Children and Youth Programs for Search for Common Ground and co-chair of the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. Over to you, Saji.
Thank you, Lily, for inviting me. It's really nice to be here, and I really want to applaud my previous speakers who have spoken so eloquently about the challenges and ideas on improving trust, collaboration, and action, so to say. Very briefly, you see the introduction of me. I wear two hats. I work at an organization called Search for Common Ground and directing our children and youth programs, and Search is an international peace-building conflict transformation organization. And the other hat is I co-chair the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security in partnership with the United Network of Young Peace Builders and UNDPPA and UNFPA together. But I wanted to take a moment to step back from this and share with you the spirit and intent of this conversation and share a story with you. And I share a story of what worked within the spaces of youth and peace and security at large, where intergenerational trust and barriers were overcome in some ways or the other. Back in the day, the problem that we were facing with the young people was policymakers were responding to young people based on a policy panic, pinning young people as the troublemakers, the victims, and also that need to be managed and controlled. And what young people around the world and some civil society came together was saying, let's transform this problematic policy narrative to see how we can create a framework that sees young people as partners, especially in high context situations like peace and security. This is where men with guns and men with power really think about marginalized societies in a lot of spaces. So we wanted to actually disrupt this space. And I want to share with you how we went about doing that. And the way we went about it was creating like a global coalition on youth, peace, and security, bringing a lot of actors together. Right now, we have over 100 organizations from UN agencies to intergovernmental bodies like the African Union, European Union, the Commonwealth, and others, international NGOs, donor organizations, practitioners, scholars, and also young people and youth-led organizations coming together to share a common agenda and a collaborative agenda, which we now call the Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda. I want to share with you a little bit about the strategy and the purpose of it itself, to how we went about transforming this policy panic concept to policy young people as partners itself. And there were three kind of pillars of our work. And we first wanted to say, learning from the 1325 Women, Peace and Security movement and engaging some of them in what worked and what didn't, what pitfalls they faced, we wanted to take a step back and say, let's create first was a political norm framework and create a set of norms that shift the conversation, connecting from country level work to saying, let's globalize this, and at a global level, create some political norms. Second was take these norms and create institutional commitments and national commitments to act on these norms. We realized institutions can't act if they don't have the political mandate to act. So these norms actually help create those norms, create the mandate to act. what is really now looking at is strengthening the financing of leadership beyond the traditional grants that are broken, that continue to marginalize young people, and trying to push institutions to open up their wallets in a sense and see how we can create new ways to invest in young people also. So this is the beginning of that long journey. But what we have learned is that this process of youth engagement, co-leadership and all that is not a project. This is a long-term effort. And that's one of the key lessons we've learned in that. Creating the Global Coalition was an exercise of bringing people with institutional power, and here I'm giving a framework to think about this engagement itself. Institutional power, like UN actors with institutional power, to work and collaborate with people with network power, horizontal power. Young people's leadership is horizontal, and they have vast networks that they are connected to and they influence. And we wanted to bridge the institutional power with network power of young people. As we realize that's one of the ways that we can transform the attitudes and norms that exist in society that create barriers for young people in shaping their work. The other piece around this was around making sure that we are walking the talk. The Global Coalition from the early days itself, we brought in the youth, created a youth co-leadership model itself. The United Network of Young Peace Builders, one of the co-leads of the UNOI is actually in the audience. They became a very critical partner in this process itself. They were holding us institutions accountable, and also they were holding their own partners at the field level accountable, and vice versa. So this accountability model came from young people and actually enabled the other institutions to work collaboratively on this. So the youth co-leadership was at the heart of this model itself. So what has this resulted in? It has resulted in 3 Security Council resolutions. There's lots of information about that itself, but I want to highlight 3 points around this idea of collective level impact it has led to. It's not something that the Security Council, people are saying that, oh, it's a UN did this, or Security Council did this, or Search for Common Ground did this. It's the us doing it. I think that's a big transformative space where people feel collectively responsible and collectively feel like they accomplished something with these resolutions. Second, what it does is actually make young people feel seen, make them feel heard, and their work recognized. And it's actually strengthened their sense of dignity and identity when young people feel excluded from society, when the violence of exclusion is so real for people. It actually made them heard. And one example of this is the Security Council, one of the oldest institutions with the oldest people in the country world speaking at these bodies. What we kind of disrupted it and had young people also testify at Security Council meetings, open and closed, several times. And it now created an example of having young people testify. We kind of normalized that itself. But at the beginning, I remember people were very afraid of having young people testify, for all kinds of reasons that adults have. But now it has become a more normal practice. So it was a risk that we actually created, and created an opportunity for people to see that this is important. The third impact of this work is the clear recognition that young people are a political force for peace. They are political actors, and it's important to recognize the political agency that they have and the peace agency that they have. And that's something that is becoming more and more recognized in this field. And very briefly, I want to share with you a couple of key thoughts to prompt the conversation to follow as well. I think as we look forward, we realize we as institutions have struggled in normal times to actually understand how to think of inclusivity, how to think of going beyond our individual identities and institutional politics to do something better for the world. The COVID pandemic has taught us that we've institutionally struggled to do that. In the coming years, and we've seen already, there's multiple shocks young people are going to face, including young people. Often institutions become hardened during shocks. So if we have not doing well during times of calmness, imagine a world when there's multiple shocks. We need to get our act together much faster. This is not a walk in the park exercise. We need to elevate our actions, because nice words, nice reports are not going to cut it for young people or people in society writ large. And the beginning of that is recognizing that we are part of the problem. as institutions like UN agencies, civil society, donors, others, we are part of the problem. We are the gatekeepers of the problem that we need to open up the gates to and say, admit it itself. Second is to understand what whole leadership looks like. I know we have used words like accountability and all that as important pillars of this, but we can't assume that people are going to trust governments or institutions because we have money or we have big names behind it. People ultimately don't care about these things. And as Hawa said, people care about food on the table, and in the coming years, more and more people are going to experience a food pandemic. So we need to understand these realities and understand how we can take these challenges on. So that requires that we understand each other's grievances and we embrace these new models of trust and friendship, as my other colleague also mentioned. Third, we need to be serious about financing these leadership models. We cannot do traditional grant making and think that it's going to settle the problems to come. We need to get over our fear of distrust to young people and say, because grants, financing is a model of distrust. That's why you create layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy that excludes people itself, primarily young people. So when you think about financing, we need to think about it from a trust-based perspective, not a distrust-based perspective. And this the key question, I think, for us as I reflect on our work, and I talked about the policy panic at the beginning. The world was focused on why are young people joining violent extremist groups? Why are young people joining gangs, cults? Why are young people doing drugs? It was a very negative-based thing. Part of the question that we were disrupting was, instead of asking these questions like why are young people joining violent groups, we forced ourselves to ask a new and disruptive question, a simple but complex question. And that question was, why are most young people peaceful? And this question of why are most young people peaceful opened us, liberated us in a way to think about the world differently and who people are in this and understand their grievances better. So with that, I just want to ask ourselves to challenge ourselves to disrupt these questions that we think that are important and think about the world to come and think about the models that we need to really aspire to, not talk about in nice words. And I really look forward to the following conversation in this. Thank you for inviting me to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Saji. Yes. Thank you for providing us with that background of the history of the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace, and Security. I think it's really important to help us to understand this shift that has happened on how young people used to be perceived in the UN and that transformation that has taken place, and the important work that has been done between these partnerships characterized by friendships between the individuals working in these institutions.